Welcome everyone to East Meets West at the Vice. Today is the 1st of May. Eric Austin and Al Beatty are going to be tying Caddis. Eric will be working on a Henryville, and later I'll be working on a Wonder Wing Caddis. But for now, I'm Al Beatty, and with me tonight is my lovely wife Gretchen, and adding on a side by side, our dear friend Eric Austin. And Eric, if you're ready to take off, I'll just bow out and let you take off with the Henryville.
All right. Well, it's not going to be a Henryville.
Oh,
That's
okay.
all right. No, we're going to talk a lot about the Henryville. As a matter of fact, here's a Henryville. The way, and since this was East meets West, I decided to do a Western version of the Henryville. And I have a story about this fly. And this is the way I tied it for the story that I'm going to tell. Years and years ago, I went into Mad River Outfitters and I saw Henryvilles tied like this, a very low profile. And I really liked the style, and I taught myself how to do it. And I tied a bunch of them up for a trip to Pennsylvania to Yellow Creek. Now, Yellow Creek isn't far from Henryville. And that's why I really wanted some of these Henryville specials. And I started off in the morning. We were fishing near a bridge, and I started off in some brutal pocket water with a fly a friend of mine swore by, called the Red Hot, which is a green weenie tied with fluorescent red material, whatever the green weenie's tied with. I can't remember now. Anyway, it's a fluorescent red green weenie is what it is. And I fished this pocket water, and man, it was tough to even stand up in this stuff. And it wore me out, but I did get a nice rainbow, and he had designed this fly for rainbows, and it worked. It was great. I was literally jigging it. That's how I got the fish. And it was, I don't know, it wasn't a stupendous rainbow. Don't get me wrong. It's probably 16 inches or so. So I was pretty happy and pretty worn out. And so I went up to the bridge, and my friend who was also on the trip, Wendell McConnell, who's unfortunately since passed away. Wendell was up there, and we didn't know each other really well. And we had seen on the other side of the bridge was this very flat water area. I mean, it was really flat water. It was barely moving. And Wendell was kind of goading me, telling me, I hear you're really a dry fly guy, and boy, I'd love to see somebody go down there and try for those fish that are rising. There were 3 fish rising, one of them under a tree. And just as we were talking, and he was kind of goading me, trying to get me to go down there, and I took one look at this, and it was a suicide mission as far as I was concerned. And I thought, yeah, this is going to be a humiliation if I go down there. And just then, this caddis landed on my finger, and it looked exactly like this fly right here. I'm telling you, it would look like the flies I had tied for the trip. So I said, yeah, all right, I'll go down there. And I went down there, and I mean, there were 3 fish rising, line. The third one under the tree, the most upstream one, or the most downstream one, I'm sorry, was under the tree. And I took, I'm going to say 15 to 20 minutes getting into place to fish for these fish, because, and any kind of disturbance that I made they were just going to get put right down. And I worked my way from behind them upstream, and my first cast went halfway to the first fish. And I do this a lot. I consider it a measuring cast, because I don't have great depth perception when I'm casting for fish. So my first cast usually goes halfway. And then from there though, I can be very accurate once I get that first cast out of the way. Next cast was right on the upper fish, caught that fish. My next cast was right on the next fish down, caught that fish. My third cast, or fourth cast in this case, was on the final fish under the overhanging branch, caught that fish. So 3 fish and 4 casts. And for at least that day, I think Wendell thought I was the greatest dry fly fisherman in the world. Now, of course, he was to later see me dry fly fish some more, and that sort of tempered that that observation. But yeah, I was definitely king of the pool that day, and I'll always remember that. And I always have loved this fly and this style fly. The fly I'm going to tie today is Mike Lawson's version of this fly. Really, is what it is. It's the Hemmingway, named for Jack Hemmingway, who was a avid fly fisherman and a friend of Mike Lawson's. And this is one version I'll do, which is similar to that very downwing Henryville I was just showing. And this is tied for Henry's Fork in Last Chance, Idaho, where Mike Lawson has his shop. And this is another way to do the wing on this fly. And I've tied just a body ahead of time for this. I'll tie this one first up, and then I've got a body done up, and I'll show you the other winging technique. So I'll tie 2 flies, but one's half done already. Oh, let me, before we start, this is right out of Mike Lawson's book called Spring Creeks, which I have here, and let me show it to you. It's a beautiful book, beautifully done. And this recipe is right out of there. And he has, for the overwing, he says duckquill segments. But it's clear from the picture in his book that he uses just one segment. And I'll show you how that works. And cuts a notch in the back of it. Underwing lemon wood duck feathers. And it's the one I see most in the shops out there is a very dark version, like a dark done version. And Mike Lawson always likes to use, I don't know that he always uses it. He uses a lot of superfine dubbing in his flies. So let's get started. This one I want to start a third of the way or so down the shank. See if I can get this in here a little more solidly. Now, Charlie Craven does a version of this, and he ties it like an elk hair caddis. He ties in a piece of ribbing, but Mike Lawson doesn't do that. He just ties in hackle. There's no rib on his fly. And I'll take this back and stop just short of this because I'm going to dub this thread. Using some wax. which is Al's dubbing wax, which you can do a nice fine body even with fur using with the help of the wax. And this is mole I'm using, I believe. Don't quote me. It's not labeled, but I think I remember it being mole. It's a very, very fine fur. I better dub clockwise or I'm never going to hear the end of it.
Definitely looks like mole.
Thank you. I was hoping there wouldn't be somebody who would say, that's not mole. That's, something else. But I think it is. I think it's a little darker than badger. What I like about dubbing with fur is if you overdo it, it just comes right off, That's really nice. Now, I'm going to take this back just a little bit, this thread back just a little bit. I'll tell you why in a sec. About 5 turns of this seems to work out. And I'll trap it here a couple of times. I have got to get this situated. This is making me crazy. At this point, because we want this to really ride low. And by the way, that can be a downfall. By the way, you don't have to do this, but if you really want the wings to set low, it's a good idea. You can tie these different ways. This is more of a spent caddis, the way it's going to be, the way I'm going to tie it. Whereas you can tie it with more upright wings and not chop that off and get more of a caddis that's fluttering around. But you can still skate this fly, so it does double duty pretty nicely. And to be honest, I only tie him this way now. But that's just me. This is the center of a wood duck flank feather. And if it's a nice large feather that you want to use for a catskill fly later, you can cut the center out of it and still use the fly for the cats. You can save the rest of the feather for the catskill fly. Otherwise, use your real small, wood duck and just strip a bunch off. I want this to go just a little bit past the bend of the hook. And I'm going to use the thumb on top technique to attach this. And that didn't work great. Let's try it again. I'll go down here a little bit and then pull it. Let's take about 3 loose turns, trying to stay on the dubbed part because we want this wing to sit low. See if I can get this to work. We'll go with this. And then bind it down, leaving just a tiny space. In back of the eye. This is a segment of a goose feather that I have prepared. And um, 1.5 times the gap can work. This is just a little bit bigger than the gap, but on this end it's actually wider. Or 3/4 of shank length is what I usually use. And let me show you how to prepare this. I've got a goose feather here, and you cut a big segment out of it, like so. What I do is this is the tip. You can try to just straighten it up, but a lot of times that's not enough. So I just cut it off flat. I want this to angle down, so I'll use the downward curvature. I'll fold this in half lengthwise. This is the hard part. So that the folded edges are near me. On my left side, I'm sorry, on my left side as I'm looking at this. And then just cut this at an angle. Like that. And then you get this. And hopefully your feather didn't split. Now you can use fixative, spray fixative on the back of this like you would a hopper. That's absolutely fine. I'm going to go ahead and use this. Again, thumb on top technique. Yeah, that'll work. Now, if you don't extend out the dubbing like I did in the beginning, I wanted this to be very low. We used to fish this fly on the Missouri that had raffia. It was just like this, only had this part was raffia, and it was like amber, and we had a clear version, and they called them spent caddis. It had mohair up at the front. It was a cool fly. This is, more of the same in a lot of ways. It's that fly. I'm just gonna secure this. Cut this. Now, I don't want a big cliff here, so I'm gonna fill this in a little bit to make a more gradual taper. And at this point, I need hackle. Got a dark dun hackle here. Tie that in with a right angle technique. And then it's just a piece of peacock herl. And the beauty of this fly is you can use all your bad peacock herl, the stuff that's not real nice and bushy like you might want to use on your Carrie Stevens flies, or you can just use almost anything. And less bushy it is, almost the better, really. You don't need a lot. Do 4 reps of hackle typically on this. Now this is a pretty big version. This is a 12. And this hackle, just so you know, is 14. I on this fly, because I want this low profile look, I typically go size smaller with hackle. But if you're doing, if you want a fly that looks like it's very active in the water and fluttering around, etc., you tie the same thing and just tie it with the right size hackle for the hook. You should do it. And there's the a spent version of the Hemmingway, as opposed to the Henryville. They're very similar flies.
Eric,
now
with this version, do you ever uh, does the wing fall apart on one fish, or is this a little more forgiving as far as the wing on
Well,
the ride
since
so low in the
let me say this, I always tie them like this,
right?
rather than like rather this version. So I don't know how this wing would hold up, but if you sprayed it with that fixative, and by the way, they still make it's Grumbacher tough film. I found it online. You can still get it, and I've used that stuff in the past on flies like this and hoppers more than anything, really. You know, hoppers with feather wings or with quill wings. Turkey wings is what I'm trying to get to. And it really works. I mean, it'll keep it together. It makes it
Grumbacher?
It's called Grumbacher Tough Film, TUFFFILM. That's what it's a flexible, it sprays on and it's flexible. However, yeah, you always have that double-edged sword, you know, because it makes the fly more wind resistant. So, you know, it's never easy. Let's see. I got a half-made one here. I want to show you the other
Eric,
the wing technique that I like.
Eric,
Yeah.
yeah, Grumbacher makes oil paints and acrylics. They're an artist company.
Yes, art supply houses is where you would get it. Yes. Good point, Jim. Thanks. All right, let's see. I got this more or less ready to go. This was done with light done because I don't have much dark done left. And I'm going to tie this one. I'm going to tie these wings on with using mallard quill, which I've done many times. I've used mallard quill on these flies, and it works great. All righty. I've got a couple. You need a right and a right and a left. In other words, for a slip and a very narrow slip from a right and a very narrow slip from a left. And here's one of each here. And you put them together. You're going to put them together so the tips angle down. So they form a V in the back. And you want these down here to cross pretty well. Because what will happen is you tie this in, and I like the far wing to be on top. Because thread torque will tend to take it away, and that's not a bad thing. So again, thumb on top technique. Take 2 or 3 very light turns and prop this up with your other finger, whatever finger you're not currently using, like that. Just get a few turns on it. Usually light turns. That's going to be fine. Go with this. Now, you only want to bind it down with a few turns. You don't want to go all the way to the eye with it or something, because as you bind these slips down, they will tend to come together. And sometimes they come together too much, and you don't have this displayed look that you want. In this case, it worked fine. I'm going to use a medium done here. By the way, Mike Lawson says that the Hemmingway can be tied with medium done as well as dark done. He doesn't specify, but the fly in his book is very, very dark. In fact, it looks almost like he used black dubbing to me on that fly. And I think maybe he used a black duck quill rather than goose, because he does say duck quills in his recipe. Okay, so let me see. I just need a piece of peacock herl. Now you could tie these in both at the same time if you wanted to save a little bulk up at the front, but honestly, you run the risk then is if one of the stems is thinner than the other of the thin one pulling out. I can get this. Oh, maybe not. Still have this. I think my depth perception is going. I have a lot of trouble plucking stuff out these days. So there's a spent, I'll call it a spent Hemmingway. You can call it whatever you want.
Both of those flies are just absolutely beautiful, Eric.
Well, thank you.
I like that wing. I don't know that I've seen that wing before.
Yeah, I really love that wing myself. And it wasn't just that day. I fished this fly with this exact wing, not the Hemmingway, but the Henryville, this one, on the Mad River a ton in Ohio, and it works great. I mean, I really like it. But if the fish are snapping at, kind of half jumping out of the water and snapping at the bugs, this probably isn't what you want to use, although you could skate this to good effect. It skates great too because of the hackle in the front.
So the only thing I was going to ask is, I'm surprised you didn't use Al's tip where you take the hackle, wrap around the thread a couple of times when you tie it off, so when you cut the racus off, it's poked back into the hackle. I was surprised you didn't do that.
I know. I gotta pick up some of these tips from Al. I see him week in, week out, and It's not that I don't pay any attention. It's just that I'm used to doing it my way to the point
It's
of no
muscle memory.
return. Yeah, I just don't even think about it, you know.
Well, it helps you with all those extra fibers that were sticking
Oh, I
out.
know
It eliminates them.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Now, do you normally use a smaller hackle on the body than the front hackle? The
I
palmered hackle on the body than the front?
Yes, yes. I almost always tie this fly with one size smaller on the abdomen and then the normal regular size on in the front. That's how I typically will tie this. Now you've got to, you can use the same size hackle throughout, and the front hackle will still be stood off a little bit because you got the peacock curl there. But yeah, I think it's more effective and it'll skate better too.
Thank you.
Anything else? I mean,
Any other questions for Eric before we pass the reins? Well, it looked like you wowed them so much that they could barely come up with something. I know you wowed me. I really, really loved the last one you put on with those two skinny duck quills.
I kind of liked it when he took the big fat piece and trimmed it.
Well, we've done a lot of that though. I mean, it's
I just,
but that one was well, that was gorgeous. Well, anything else for us, Eric, before we move on?
no, that'll do it for me.
Okay. Well, we're going to talk about Wonder Wings, and in fact, most people think of Wonder Wings when they see a fly like this, and this is one that I did for a program on Monday, and just a divided up wing fly. It's just a divided up wing fly, and in our book, Wonder Wing Flies, this type of a fly is probably the smallest amount of the book. What we're going to explore today is the Wonder Wing used differently. So let me get this one out of here because we're not going to be tying it. We're going to be doing a caddis. And in fact, let me get this guy out here and I'll put him in the vise. And by the way, it's got a major problem that I caused just before we were going on. I said, "Oh, I see this fiber. I better trim," and I did. And I want you to notice what happened to my wing. There, right at the back, I cut half the wing off. I said, "Well, I ain't going to tie it over today." But the way the fly is supposed to look, let me turn him around. Is with a wing that looks like, well, it's hard to tell. You'll see when we put it together. But the one that really is the one you want to look at is this one right here is what I'm going to tie large enough for you to see. But we always fished this fly for the Mother's Day caddis hatch, and that was a size 16. Now this is the fly that this let me get, there you go. This is the fishing fly. This is a 16. I want you to notice that the wing extends way beyond the hook. You'll notice that, at least we've noticed, often you'll look at a caddis sitting on the water and you say, "Oh, that's a size 14." And then you happen to catch one, flip it over, and it's a size 14 wing on a size 16 or an 18 body. Wings stick way out the back. Now, I'm not going to put the wing clear out the back on the one that I'm going to tie today, but you can adjust that based on how much the natural looks like that. But let's get into the recipes right off. We developed this fly, not too long after we got married. We learned about the Wonder Wing in Europe. And quite frankly, that one that you saw, the looped Wonder Wing on the parachute, it took us about 5 years to develop that wing style because the actual Wonder Wing, as we learned about it in Europe, had the stem tied to the hook shank. And on an upwing fly with the stem tied to the hook shank, the wing is too stiff, corkscrews like crazy, it'll twist your leader something fierce. But what does not twist is if you take the stem and you tie it trude style, parallel to the hook shank. And that's what we're going to be doing today. But anyway, dry fly. I don't know where I got that 5. I was typing fast today, setting this up, and it's not a 5 hook. I don't have any 5s. It's a probably a size 8 to 20. Thread is brown. The bullet head, we're going to talk about that because it can be tied bullet head style. I'll be tying it half head. And whenever we have a half head, we call them bubble heads. Anyway, it'll be deer or elk. In fact, I'm going to be using elk today, and we'll talk at length about the elk and how you want to select it. The body will be brown dubbing because we're going to be tying what we did for the Mother's Day caddis hatch, which happens on the Yellowstone every day around Mother's Day. And the wing is going to be a body feather. Notice that I didn't say what kind of a body feather, because it could be anything from a partridge to a pheasant, and I'll be using pheasant today. And you can put legs on if you want to. I'm going to do Madam X style rubber legs, but you can put them on or you can leave them off. It's kind of up to you. What we want to do now, though, is get over to the materials. And I know this looks like a mess, and that's exactly what it is, because I want to talk to you about some of the materials. First off, I'm going to set some things over at the tying area so that we can just talk about the selection of materials. This is my rubber leg material. I'm just going to set it over there so it's waiting for me when it's time to use it. It's just rubber leg material. It's orange with black stripes on it. My dubbing and my dubbing wax. I'll just set that over there as well. And I've already got a feather selected, and I'll tell you why I selected the one that I did. So I'll just set it over there. Now let's talk about elk hair. You already know that when we talk about deer hair, that we're talking about the dark stripe down the back and all of that. And that's what we do for wings. Well, we're going to actually wanting this half of a bullet head, or a bubble head as we call it, to flare a bit. And you don't always want flaring when you're doing wings and tails. So you don't want that real dark stuff along the back. And even though an elk has that real dark stuff along the back, it does not go as far down into the hide. Doesn't mean that the hair doesn't have the right consistency. It's just not dark. But what I want you to see here is I have had to select hair based on how it feels, not how it looks. This is all hair that probably looks pretty similar to you. This is some of the darker stuff up towards the back, and you can see it's slightly different. And then here is some just down from the backbone, but not quite all the way to the rib. And this is at the rib. Well, I can tell you right now, in looking at this on camera, you were probably saying, well, they look about the same. Well, this one over here feels soft. Soft like a shaving brush. This feels stiff like a clothing brush that you brush the dust off of your suit jacket. So it feels a lot stiffer. So you have to go by feel. Softness, stiffness. And we're looking for the stiffness, and we'll be using that. So I'll set the rest of this aside. We'll just keep this one here. And now let's talk about pheasant. Now, one of my favorite feathers for tying this Mother's Day caddis are these guys. They're called the church windows. But tying a size 12 with one of those is just really difficult because the fibers are too short. So I'm going to go to the other side and get one of these large feathers that's got really long fibers on it so that I'm able to manipulate it on a size 12. However, I used one of my favorite feathers down in here, these church window feathers, for the 16 that I tied. So let's get back over to the vise.
Al, what bird is that?
I'm sorry, what?
What kind of bird is that?
That's a ringneck pheasant.
That sure has a lot of. Okay, go ahead.
Maybe it's not a ringneck pheasant. Anyway, it's a pheasant.
Is that one of those weird crosses that we got?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I know Tom Whiting used to do some pretty crazy crosses, and let
We've got
me-
some stuff here that doesn't have a name.
we got some stuff that doesn't have a name because sometimes we'd be sitting in the conference room, having lunch, and Tom would say, I wonder what would happen if we threw this bird in with this bird and they crossed with each other. And that would happen. And I have a whole box of that kind of stuff here that of the results of that. It's interesting, and I'll just leave it at that. But it's messing around with the genetics, I guess you could call it. Anyhow, I'm going to start my thread right at the hook eye. I'm going to wrap a short distance back and go right back to the hook eye again. And I'm going to trim off my waist and take my half hitch tool and throw a half hitch in there because I want to keep that thread anchored right there at the hook eye. Now I'm going to move back to my materials area and capture some of this stiffer but light, we'll call it elk hair. And just like we always do, we straighten it out if it needs to be, and this has a little bit of curve in it. And then I'm going to grab it by the tips, and then I'm going to go over here to the waist bend on my way back to the vise and get rid of the trash. And that looks pretty good. I'll put it into my hair stacker. Give it a couple of taps. And turn it around. Now I want to get rid of a broken tip. I can see that there's one there already. And I'll just get my tweezers to do that. John Wright, can you see that? John,
Yes, I can, Al. Thank you. As a
okay,
matter of
good.
fact, I was tying up a deer hair fly today, and I actually found 3 or 4 broken tips for the first time in my life. Thank you.
Okay, well, good. That's I'm glad to hear that. That's going back to last Friday when John had asked a question about that. Now we have options here, and I am going to tie this on so that it's about as long as the shank, give or take. And I want that to stay on top now. I don't want it to go all the way around the hook. So I'll just bind that in place, wrapping back with really tight wraps. Okay, now I'm going to trim off the waist. And I'll use just a severely angled cut so I get a good taper into what will eventually be the body. And then I'm just going to take my fingers and use the tip of this finger over here to guide that thread in there so that I can bind down all those cribbed ends without having a bunch of ends sticking up into the tying operation that I don't want. I just want that all smoothly done. Now, I have an anchor point right here, and I got another problem, a potential problem, and I'm going to fix it right now. In messing around with these flies, sometimes these hairs will cross under, get all crossed around and come across like that. And I don't really want that. I want to make sure that the bubble head stays bubbled up on top of the fly. So I'm going to take my anchor point back here, pull that up, come around it, come back to my anchor point, and anchor it off right there. Now forget about it. Except for one thing. Having tied a whole bunch of these, I know that this stuff, you see, I got one fiber right here already sticking out and getting in the way. It's going to end up driving me nuts. So I have some options that I can temporarily gather this hair in one of several ways. One is I can get a Post-it note and take the sticky side of the strip and use it as just kind of fold it over and stick it together. And that works pretty good. A piece of Scotch tape works really good if you'll stick the sticky side to your finger a few times to get about half of the sticky stuff gone. Or you can just kind of come around that with a little bit of thread, like I'm doing right there. That holds it together. Come back here, take a half hitch around here. I'm gonna just half hitch it off. Because now I'm going to be able to do a whole lot of stuff without the hair getting in my way and getting tangled up. I know that seems like probably a lot of waste, and in fact, the sticky note is a really good idea. Now I'm just going to reattach my thread again.
Al,
Yeah.
Al,
Yeah.
why not use a twist tie, small twist tie?
That would work fine. I mean, all those things, a twist tie, the sticky side of tape, um, the post-it notes, all of those things would work. I would suspect in some applications, a clippy like this would work. But it would probably get in my way more than the hair. But anyway,
Painter's tape would work more like.
painter's tape would probably be a really good option
Yeah.
because it is not quite so
Not
sticky.
quite so sticky.
Anyway, and all I'll have to do now to get rid of this is I'll take my scissor point and just flip it off. And it'll be back to the way it is. But right now it's going to keep those fibers out of my way while I go through the next operation. And I'm just going to put a thread base on here and come back forward and get my dubbing wax out. And go to the backside camera. And I'll put my wax on the thread. And I want to go to the, I want to go to show you what I'm doing here. Now, right there is the cap. And I've got that cap laying down there with the open end up. Take your wax. When you're done with it, put it back down into there and get it out of the way so you don't end up down in the trash bin. But anyway, we'll go to our dubbing now. And we'll just touch the dubbing to the thread. Until it's nicely arranged. Lay that down. Twist in one direction only. Hopefully it's the clockwise direction. But I don't always know. Now I'm going to wrap to the back of the hook. And when I get back here, I'm going to wrap a larger part, a larger body back here. Because if you ever looked at a caddisfly, their body is bigger at the back than it is in the middle or towards the front. And so that's bigger and heavier. And now I'm just going to advance this forward, and I'm going to need just a tiny bit more dubbing. I used a little bit more in that wider application at the back than I thought it would, but that's all right. I'll just get some more out of my bundle of dubbing here. Twisting in one direction only, hopefully clockwise. And I'll just wrap all the way to my hair, and then I'll come back to where I'm going to want my head to eventually be. Now we're going to form our wing. And now this is a really big feather, much bigger than I would be worrying about if this was not a size 12. But I want you to see what we're going to have on this wing when it's stroked back. Let's just get it all stroked back here. It's not going to be like you see right here, what you're going to have now. Now there's what your wing is going to be. And that makes a good looking wing. This goes away. This is a wing. Well, one of the things that you need to do when you're tying on a wonder wing is you tie it on short and you pull it out to length. And so a couple of snug but not tight turns. And you can see I've got it just kind of short in there. I'm going to grab a hold of the stem and keep it under control while I pull that wing out to length. Now, I want you to see what we've got there. What we have there now is a really good profile of a stonefly wing. Stonefly wings tend to be more flat, so this is a very doable pattern for a stonefly. Just change colors and sizes and all those kinds of things. So to turn this into a caddis wing, we need to do some rearranging of materials. We talked about this on Friday. material redistribution. And I'm just going to start pushing here and here, working those fibers down on the side of the hook. And you just have to keep fiddling with it until you get it just where you want it. And that, I want you to notice now that those fibers are starting to cup down around the body. And I'll do this side really good so you can see what I'm talking about. You see how that's getting down on the side there? I can keep going. I can close it on the bottom if I want to. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to waste the time today, but you pick the wing profile that you want and then go for it. Right now, I'm just going to anchor this down. Take all of this, pull it up and cut it off. Now I can tell you right now, I've already got some fibers caught here, but I would have had a dickens of a mess. I know I tried it earlier today, just to see what would happen.
Well, it came loose.
Oh, that's all right. This is the idea that's going to come loose. I was going to take it off. But I have now. Tie that down. And now I've got that thread that was holding my thing out of the way. Well, I've now pulled it off. Part of trimming off the fibers of the wing. Trim that off. And now let's right about here, fold over our wing. Not our wing, our head, I'm sorry. Now, soft wraps at this point, because what we want to do is to make sure that we don't have any hairs crossing over each other and messing up the look of a really good head. That head is looking pretty good, but I need to tighten it up just a touch. One of the things I can do is that I can relax see how I relax the thread? And if I relax the thread and push and then pull down, I'll hold that. Now I'll come over here on the other side and relax the thread and pull down. And what I've done is that I've tightened those hairs all the way around to the head. And they're a little bit out of line right here, so I'll give everything a little bitty twist. And now I'll tighten up. And you will decide now how much of a profile you want from this right here. The main thing for this is for you. The wing there, let's see, let me see if I can turn that so you can, there you go. There's the wing sticking out over the body. What the fish will see is what, at least I think they see, is exactly what I've seen on my tank when I put it in the water. As you look up into the light, because that's where the sun's coming from, and you can see the less dense wing with the body in the middle of it, which is very dense. And it shows that kind of a silhouette. And that's what this does too, because you can see right here that my wing has got, well, some little spaces through it. Anyway, we're going to go now to our legs. And I'll just take one of these and pull it off. In fact, I don't need the whole thing. This is a reasonably small fly. I'll just take half of it. And one of the things that's really important with rubber legs, I think, is to get them about the same length. I don't try to line them up. That just takes too long. I'll just tie those on the side of the hook next to me. Snug but not tight, 2 wraps. Pull the other one over to the opposite side. That looks pretty good. Let's just pull that back, cut that off. And let me get my whip finish tool out. And we'll throw a whip finish on that guy. And there is I guess you'd call it a bubblehead caddis.
Whoops.
Bubblehead caddis. And any questions?
I like that pattern, Al. That's gorgeous. I
Yeah.
would even think you might use guinea for the back wing with all those little spots.
Chuck, you notice back here in my recipe,
Yes, I did.
it said body, it
Guinea.
said wing, body feather, and I have used everything from a chicken to I tell you one that makes an absolutely gorgeous wing is a body feather off of a partridge.
Yes, yes.
It just I gotta tell you, you get some incredibly beautiful wings when you do those, and you can see what I got with that wing of maybe the less desirable feathers off of a hen or off of a pheasant. And somebody's questioning whether it's a ringnet. Quite frankly, I don't know. I got pieces of
Actually,
stuff around here.
I just
not
looked
sure
at a
what it is.
picture. I think what you have there is more, it looked like part of the wing and the breast. And the breast of a ringneck pheasant is more red colored is what I was seeing with your
That could be
patch
it.
that you have there. What I'm used to
I-
seeing is when you normally buy a pheasant, most of it's centered along the back. And
Yeah.
so you see those blue and green feathers and the other
Yeah.
ones.
This one's all folded up, and Mike, I tell you what, it's
I
just
think that's the
pieces.
front of the bird, the breast of the bird right there.
Okay.
I think that is ringneck. So sorry about that.
I'll take your word for it. All I can tell you is that you cannot believe some of the wings that you will get when you take those feathers that look pretty ho-hum and reverse them and tie them on. And you can adjust the width, how they sit on the body, whether it's flat or down on the sides. Those are all things that are up to you. You just build it the way you want it.
Hey, Al, this is Jerry. I like using the blue-eared pheasant for like salmon flies. And have that wing like that. Works really well.
I totally agree with you. Like I said, all you want to do with the pheasant, with the salmon fly is you want to make it a little bit more flat where the caddis tends to be more down around the body.
Yeah.
Oh, I got a quick question. You alluded wonderfully to the fact that the caddis is wider at the rear end and the taper is actually backwards from the way so many caddis flies are tied. I mean, even Mike Lawson, who's certainly an expert, he's got a taper the opposite direction in his book here on the Hemmingway. I wonder why more tires don't consider that.
I don't consider it whenever I put hackle on the body because it don't make any difference. But this is the body that sets on the water. And the only reason I did it is because I was trying to follow the recipe. I don't think the fish give a darn one bit at all. All they see is a silhouette against the brighter sky or whatever. And you've got the kind of the halo of the wings sticking out, which is more porous, and then the denseness of the body. And I would suspect they're not going to look and see whether it's fatter at the back or the front or the whatever. But that's just one of the things that I noticed in working with LaFontaine on some things. And I did a bunch of stuff one year on the Bighorn River. We were having just terrible luck fishing. So I said to heck with it. And I had brought a snorkel and a mask. And I didn't do any diving, but I would get into the riffles where the caddis and stuff were hatching. And I would just kind of lay down on the riverbank, stick my face in the water with this snorkel and grab stuff as it went by. I'll tell you, the most enlightening thing for me was to see the dangest blob coming down the river that turned out to unfold in my hand as a caddis. It just was stunning. I mean, the things that you got out of the drift as compared to what they looked like when they were on the surface, when they were in the drift, they were just a blob of stuff.
Oh, wow.
But anyway,
that's really cool.
Any questions from you all out there?
Yeah. No. Hey, Eric, this is Jerry. Hey,
yeah.
When what I do sometimes when you're trimming the hackle, the body hackle, is I will trim it high in the back and low in the front to be able to control that angle sometimes. And that way it helps keep that wing from collapsing. Totally. In other words, it gives you a little bit of a support underneath that wing, just like the mallard or the wood duck would do. But it helps keep that hackle, the wing,
Gotcha.
wing from
Gotcha.
collapsing
Yeah, that
all the
makes
way down. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it works really, really well.
Hey, Al, I have something I alluded to last week that I'd like to talk about when we get a
Okay.
minute. Once you're done your segment.
Hey, I'm done. I'm done. It's unless there's questions, and I don't think there are. I mean,
Well, one other comment regarding the body shape on a caddis. Kelly Gallup did a lot of, I think he did a lot of like scuba where he would go underneath the water and look up and watch them go over. And he describes the body part of a caddis as being more tubular, where again, most people do a taper from back to thicker in the front. He describes it more as tubular, but I think you're kind of on the right track with a little bit. If you make it a little thicker at the back, you're kind of leading that to be more of a tube shape as you go forward.
I've always done all my caddis, I've always done tubular, but I noticed that Charlie Craven does a lot of his stuff thicker in the back, like Al does. So that's why I was asking the question. I just to become a little more enlightened on the whole thing.
We'll have to ask a fish sometime.
all I can tell you is there's been one heck of a lot of fish caught on an elk hair caddis, and I've had a lot of elk hair caddis that just had a thread body and it did a darn good job for me.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, I talked about a fly last week briefly that I designed a long time ago, and I was just thrilled to death with this fly. It was, as far as I was concerned, it was God's gift to the mayfly. And I took it out on Olentangy River, which was just 5 minutes from my house in Delaware, Ohio. And there's no trout there. So it was just to see how it looked on the water, and it looked great. It looked just like a mayfly in the water. So in the meantime, Hans Velleman asked me to send him some flies for his website. And I was thrilled by this. And I was so excited about this new fly. I sent it along. And without having the proper testing procedure for this thing. And I'll show you the fly here. Here's the fly. And it's a Wally wing, extended body. As you can see, the hook has been curved up. And man, when this thing's on the water, and by the way, the hackle there's a V cut in the hackle. You can't see it in this picture, but there's a V cut in the hackle, and that body sticks down in the film, and the wings, you can see this thing a mile away, and it's got the cool tail, and boy, was I excited. Well, so I sent it off to Hans, and he took this picture and put it on the website with some of my other flies. Well, then later that spring, I went to Molesnick Spring Creek near Bozeman, Montana. And sure enough, very spooky fish there, very tough fishery. Man, the fish were all over this thing. They were just, if you got it anywhere near a fish, they were hitting it. I don't know how many hits I had on this fly, and I could never hook a fish. Some design flaw or other, probably the curved hook, I would imagine. I don't know. I've never known. I was absolutely despondent. Gave some of the flies to my friend Bruce and told him to do further study. And he said, yeah, he said, fish hit this thing constantly. and I can't hook a fish with it. So I've named this fly Eric's Folly because I already had an Eric's debacle on my saltwater my my saltwater crab pattern that was uncastable. So anyway, I wanted to show you guys this and just to disabuse you of thinking that you're a fly designer and before you make a mistake and it winds up on somebody's website and really it shouldn't be anywhere, unfortunately. So that's my
Craig,
fly.
I think there's a fix to it, believe it or not.
All
I
right.
think if you bend the gape of the hook and make it like a number 16 or something, if you could get the point of the hook more parallel with the upper half of the body and the wing area, you might do better with the hookups.
I see, so that would go more like this.
Does that make sense? Because it's equivalent of
Sure.
getting it's equivalent of having a fly where you've opened the gape of the hook wide open is what it amounts to, the way it's bent
Yeah,
now.
and that I completely agree. And I hadn't thought about closing up that gate, to be honest. But I had thought about, well, I could straighten it out. But the thing is, if you straighten the hook, if you tie it on you could tie this on a straight hook, but that's not what I wanted. I love the way this looks because the wing in the water tilts back and it looks great. And the fish think it looks great too. But yeah, that'd be worth a try.
Yeah, I
What
think
about
I think
up-eye
one of the European hooks where they have just the hook point just the last little bit like with the barbless where the barb would be and that those points turn up, that might turn it.
Ah, yeah.
That's what I'm going to do with it. I'll let you
And then
know.
Eric, they don't make the hooks any much anymore, but a up-eye hook. You're bending the hook to make this fly, right? Are you bending it yourself?
Yes. Yeah, bend it myself. Yes.
So what if
bend
it
the
was
front part up?
an up-eye hook to start with, and then bent the shank, if that would kind of pull in a different direction.
Yeah, and I've thought about that. I thought maybe when I try to do a hook set, which when I'm dry fly fishing, though, I let the fish take the fly down before I hook, before I set. But anyhow, I thought about that. I thought maybe I'm just pulling the barb and the hook point out of the fish's mouth with this curve in the shank. I don't know. But anyway, I've kind of given up on the thing. And it was it wasn't easy to tie.
I think that there is a solution to that because the profile, forget the hook, cut the hook and throw it away. I don't care. The profile of that thing is stunning.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I love this thing. I still like the fly.
What you need to do, Eric,
if you can figure out the solution, you can call it Eric's Phoenix.
Well, Eric, what you need to do is take that, cut off both ends of the hook, so you only have the fly. Now, take and lay that down on a piece of paper and take a hook and start working a hook around and find out what kind of scaffolding do you need to build on the hook to make the fly look like that, but keep the hook in a straight line so it'll snag the fish.
Good point. That's probably the best suggestion. Anyway, a lot of thought went into this thing.
Why not just tie an extended body and tie that extended body onto an egg hook and go from there? Wouldn't that do the same thing?
That's a good idea. In
Yeah.
fact, I'm just looking at that right now. If that was tied as an extended body and you tied it on a scud hook so that your hook was in the middle of the body rather than at the very end.
Yeah.
Sure. That's a really good idea.
I like that extended body, John. Good idea.
Can you keep that curve on an extended body?
Yeah, you could, because it depends on what you put the extended body on. And I should do one of our extended body classes, but there's a way to do that with a piece of mono and a light mono and let's see, Lou Duncan's on here, and you can actually shape it with a heated bodkin to get it to curve one way or the other.
Yeah, I do mine with silicone. I spread silicone on a fairly large sewing needle and then dub it. And then when I take it off the needle, I can actually bend it. And then when the silicone hardens, you got a real nice bend body.
Yeah, I do the
Cool.
same thing. Only I dip mine in glue. In fact, there's kind of a funny story with that I call it the glue dub body. But anyway, there was a gentleman by the name of Paul Deshane, I think, and I'm messing his name up. But anyway, he was from France, came to Whiting Farms when Gretchen and I worked there, and he stayed with us at the house, and we had dinner, and then we went, like everybody did when they came to our house, we went to the fly tying room and we tied flies. Now, he didn't speak English and I didn't speak French, but with some sign language and a word or two of English here or there, he took a needle and put it into the glue, picked up some dubbing, put it on the end of the needle and went twist, 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 pulled it off, extended something or another. And I figured out he was saying body, and he laid that down. And exactly what John was saying, when he uses that spray stuff, you can do the same thing with a dip glue. And before it dries, you bend it in the shape that you want it to be.
I saw somebody do a demo on that. It was with a longer fiber dubbing, like maybe superfine or something similar, where it was kind of twisted onto a bodkin with glue and then allowed to dry.
Yeah, you're better off to have the fine and dry and that kind of stuff, so that you can kind of stretch the fibers out. Especially if you want to put a tail in it, you have to slip the tail in the middle of the dubbing before you put it around the glued end of the bodkin. We'll have to do one of those classes. We haven't done one of those extended body classes for a while.
I forgot, we made a bunch of those, like the Frenchman did a head, didn't we?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I had forgotten
Oh,
about
his
that.
name was Jean-Paul Deshane.
Yeah, Jean-Paul.
Jean-Paul
There's
Deshane.
Jean-Paul.
Yeah.
I tried to speak French to him and it was a disaster. My French isn't that good.
Yeah, right. Anyhow, I guess we're kind of at the point where we can just kind of chat, so we can get into get rid of this spotlight, and I'll get rid of Eric's spotlight. And now we're all just on a gallery, and we can chat ever how you want.
Do you want to sign off of Facebook?
No, I'm going to leave it on Facebook for the moment. We need to
Okay.
talk about next week, don't we? Is what you were planning on doing with next week?
Yeah, I'm going to do a streamer that Jim Ferguson suggested that it should be fun. The Chief Neetabaugh, which was tied for the Moosehead River in Maine. Back when, and Chief Neetabaugh was a Penobscot Indian chief, and he designed the fly and tied it for his shop. He had a tackle dealership on Moosehead Lake.
Oh gosh.
And it was quite a character.
So we'll do streamers next week. And I think what I'll do, even though it's from an Eastern tire, I just absolutely love this fly. My absolute number one streamer for Spring Creek's keyword is the Thunder Creek. Only I'm not talking about a 4-inch long Thunder Creek. I'm talking about an 1.5 inch long, tied on a size 12, small Thunder Creek. Absolutely a killer on a Spring Creek.
Well, Al, wasn't he actually a Midwesterner, not an Easterner? So Midwest, it's got the word West in it. He was from
Midwest is in
Minnesota, I
the
think.
East. The Midwest is in the East. Didn't you know that?
We're east of the Rockies. Yeah.
It's east. It's the rest of. I mean, I'd never go over the Mississippi River if I could help it. I mean, Jesus Christ me. And I'm joking with you all, but
Well, joking, when I was a kid, I really called that the East. I did, and I got corrected several times. But
right.
yeah, I thought anything east of Montana or east of Wyoming was the East.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it is. I remember way back when west was west of St. Louis, because that was a jumping off point for the trappers and the explorers of the old west, and an awful lot of wagon trains took off from St. Louis.
Growing up in New York, I thought Indianapolis was, or Indiana was in the West because they had Indians.
You know, it becomes all a matter of perspective. It's too bad Paul's not on here right now. We could probably get a real difference in perspective of East and West.
The first time I went to Colorado Springs back in 1963, I got off the train and I fully expected to see cowboys and covered wagons.
Hey, I got to tell you a story about that. We had some dear friends from Denmark come to visit us, and we picked them up at the conclave when it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. So we drove to Grand Rapids. They flew into Grand Rapids. We met them there, and then they were going to travel with us to Montana after the conclave. And so we headed out of Michigan to go home. 2 days in cornfields, and she finally says, the lady, she says, doesn't this ever stop? I mean, because in Denmark you can drive across the country in an hour and a half. I mean, it's and that's it. We were still in cornfields, and I said, we'll be okay here in about another 50 miles. But anyway, we arrived in Montana, and I said to her, her name was Beattys. I said, Beattys, what would you like to see in Montana? She says, I have a list. She says, I want to see a tumbleweed blowing in the breeze. I want to see a wooden sidewalk. I want to see a sign broken on one side swinging in the breeze. And there was one other thing. I forget what it was.
She wanted to go to a graveyard to see the
Oh,
old tubes.
wanted to see the graveyard, a Boot Hill graveyard.
Yeah.
No problem. So we took her to Virginia City, Montana, about 20 miles outside of Bozeman, and she saw all of them in the first 5 minutes. She says, well, that wasn't so hard after all. Yeah.
So Eric, they used to make a hook called a nymph hook that was bent that way. They were
that's what gave me the idea for that fly. Actually, was that hook, because I think there had been an article in Fly Tire or somewhere that I read, one of the magazines that had that hook that came bent up. You know, it was made that way.
One of the fellows at our fly fishing club here in Seattle used to tie a fly, Walt Swanson, and what he did to make his extended body, you've heard of the technique where you just wrap thread around a pin and put flex cement on it as you wrap and pull it off. You know, that's one way. Yeah. But what he did is he took two little tiny fine strands of wire and put in the vise, tied it on the wire. Okay.
Wow.
And then you could bend it the shape you want. So you tied it straight, and he actually tied in the tips, the long forked tails at the same time. And then he would just bend that, tie it into that wire and up in the front, But that was another technique you might want to think about. So I wish Walt was able to still tie. He's not able to tie anymore, but he'd be a great tire for tying extended body mayflies, I'll tell you.
That sounds like a great technique.